Wednesday, July 14, 1897. The Standard Union, Brooklyn. It may be a hoax. Story of the finding of a man's head in Newtown Creek. Police are making a search. An Italian tells Captain Lees that he saw the gruesome object in the mud. It is said to have been thrown there by a German who was deaf-feared. That section of the city in the neighborhood of Scott Avenue has been on the qui-vive since early this morning because of a story of the finding of a man's head, supposed to be that of William Guldensuppe, wrapped in a newspaper in Newtown Creek. James Sitar, an Italian of Curdy Place, says there at 6 o'clock, while working near the creek, on the dump, a German came along and called his attention to a bundle which he had thrown into the creek. It contained a man's head with black mustache and a cut on the left cheek. Sitar hastened to the 6th Precinct Police Station and told the story to Captain Alexander Lees. The Italian said the man who showed him the object in the mud and water was about 56 years old, 5 feet 6 inches in height, and wore dark pants and vest, a woolen jacket and derby hat. He had a reddish-gray mustache. Captain Lees questioned him closely, and hiring a buggy and 2 workmen, drove to the place where the head was said to have been thrown. They obtained a boat and have been dragging the creek since 10 o'clock. The creek at this point is filled with black mud, which makes it exceedingly difficult to work to advantage. According to Sitar's story, the German found the package on the shore and hurled it into the creek. Wednesday, July 14, 1897. The Buffalo Inquirer. Guldensupple's head, found in an ash dump by a Negro who threw it away again. New York City, July 14 Bulletin. A Negro working on an ash dump in Newtown Creek this morning found the severed head of a man among the refuse. He was so frightened at his discovery that he threw it from him into the creek. He described it as having a black mustache, and the police believe it to be the missing head of Guldensuppe, the Turkish bath masseur, who is alleged to have been murdered by Martin Thorne, his rival for the affections of Mrs. Knack, who is also accused of complicity in the crime. Tuesday, November 9, 1897. The St. Joseph Herald, St. Joseph, Missouri. Trial of a murderer. Noted case which has shocked the whole of New York. Guldensupple's missing head. Other parts of the body have been found by detectives and newspaper reporters. Mrs. Knack, the woman who lured the unfortunate man to a point where his enemy could murder him. She may join the red-handed criminal in expiating the crime in death. New York, November 8. Surprising progress has been made today in the trial of murderer Martin Thorne in the Queens County Court of Oyer and Terminer at Long Island City, and when court adjourned, the jury had been completed. It had been expected that the obtaining of the jury would be a long and tedious process, owing to the wide publicity that had been given the crime with which he is charged, and the supposed prejudice against him. The case, which is The People versus Martin Thorne, is based upon the discovery in June last in East River and Ogden's Woods, north of this city, of portions of one human body. The head was missing. By a series of curious links in a chain of circumstantial evidence, the portions of the dismembered remains have been identified by a number of witnesses as the body of William Guldensuppe, a rubber in a Turkish bathhouse in this city. Guldensuppe had not been at his work for several days before the ghastly discovery of his supposed remains, nor has he been seen since that time, unless, as it is alleged, it was in Germany by a certain person of whom none appear to know, except counsel for the man who was put on trial today for having committed the murder of the missing man. The postulate of the identity of the corpse being conceded, the next thing to be done was to look up Guldensuppe's connections and from them ascertain a possible motive for his murder. It was easily ascertained that he had lived on terms of intimacy with Mrs. Augusta Knack, a midwife, but that some time before the disappearance of Guldensuppe, the pair had quarreled, and that in the woman's flat, Guldensuppe had fought with and beaten the man who had supplanted him in his mistress's affections, Martin Thorne, a barber, who, smarting under the beating he had received, was overheard to threaten to get even with Guldensuppe. Here, then, were motives that might have inspired a murder. A woman desirous of being rid of a discarded lover, whose proximity might at any moment become troublesome, and the successful rival who had experienced the superior prowess of his predecessor in the woman's affection might again be made to suffer the pain and humiliation of a beating. The arrest of Mrs. Knack was followed a few days later by that of Thorne, who the police had some difficulty in finding, but whose whereabouts was disclosed by John Gotha, another barber, and a relative by marriage of the accused man. Gotha has made the statement upon which the police rely to aid in Thorne's conviction, that Thorne admitted his guilt to him, and since Thorne has been confined, 2 men who shaved him at different times have told of incriminating admissions by the accused. There have also been reports that Mrs. Knack had virtually admitted afterwards severing his head, dismembering his corpse, and disposing of the remains in various ways. In the trial of this case, Judge Wilmot M. Smith will preside. District Attorney Youngs will conduct the prosecution, assisted by ex-surrogate August N. Weller and Assistant District Attorney George W. Davidson. William F. Howe and Joseph Moss will defend Martin Thorne, whose trial will precede that of Mrs. Knack, and Emmanuel Friend and W. H. Hirsch will attend as counsel for the woman. At the opening of court, the list of 200 names of special jurymen summoned were read, and then Sheriff Dole was directed to produce the prisoner. Thorne, handcuffed to a deputy sheriff, walked briskly to the table at which his legal advisers were sitting. He was cleanly shaven and showed no signs of nervousness or apprehension. Both sides were prepared for the trial, and as Thorne stood up and the clerk explained to him his right of challenging any of the jurors summoned, he bent forward, listening to every word. When the clerk had finished, the prisoner inclined his head slightly and sat down. During the examination of the talesman, a faint smile played around Thorne's mouth, and at times he appeared to be one of the most unconcerned persons in court.